And welcome back. This is part 2 of a series where we talk about cards in each faction that you should be thinking about that your opponent could have at any given time. In the first video, did the first 3 factions, Lyra, Axiom and Bravos. So we've got Muna, Yzmir and Ordis today. I should note, probably should have mentioned it in the first video, but in this one, any colour shifted cards, it's also an option. Obviously each card is represented in exactly 2 factions in their rare versions. There are small differences between the two. Sometimes you will have rares that have the text of the common version, and sometimes they have the text of the rare version, or some variant in between. One example would be Alilo in Yzmir and Axiom. They won't feature in this video, spoiler, but when played as their Yzmir version, they are classed as a spell when played, and in Axiom they're classed as permanents, which obviously is, dependent on the archetype that their factions play and what they would like to get out of the cards. And I've endeavoured where possible to include the cards in their main faction, but sometimes if they're more prevalent in the colour shifted version, that's where they show up. Something like the Hunger, for example, came up in Bravos, won't show up here in Yzmir. But let's jump into it. We'll start with the Muna cards, still in no particular order, but we'll begin with Persephone. So for 3 mana, this can come down on turn 1 as a single card to play. And there are both heroes and cards in Muna that care about being in green. And when this is played in the rare version, obviously making the 2 regions green and only green impacts the stats. So this is functionally, when it's on the field, a 3/3/3, because these 2 are never going to matter. The common version will be 3XX, depending on what expedition you're in. It can obviously just be 3 stats if you're only in green, but in the event that it's being played on one of the many other expeditions where you care about brown or blue, it'll be a 3/0. So you can play around this one in a couple of ways. Obviously having some form of removal is a big idea in the mirror matchups. Something like, I believe it's Lost in the Woods, will always hit this card, but usually you're just going to be thinking about it as a bit of a staple for certain heroes. So Rin and Orchid obviously really likes this card in particular, but it will show up as others for similar reasons to the Will-o'-the-Wisp that we saw in the Lyra section of the previous video. Just invalidates a lot of stats. If there's anything asymmetrical on your side of the field, you have to think about that. You can go over the top of it, but it is stat positive on the reserve side, and there are other cards that interact with it, like a Mighty Simbi or something like that. Has a lot of play with certain types of uniques as well, so if you see this, it does sort of open up that deck building space for your opponent, so you can think about those sort of cards. I don't know if we have any, but we'll search for one quickly as an example. Ordis Liaison in our collection. Don't have it. That's alright. We'll move on. But there are uniques that care about being in green. The other one is the general removal suite for green. Requiems and Cloth Cocoons are both very important. Obviously in Altered in general, you're looking at that 2 to 4 mana range for most of your removal. It's very important to know how much these cards cost from hand. So for Requiem, if your opponent ever goes below 2 mana, or Cloth Cocoon, if they ever go below 3, can't play it anymore unless they've got cost reducers, which does happen. But both these cards can be played around. You're usually looking at the 4+ mana for stuff that is conditionless. But similar to what we'll see in the Ordis part of this video, these can both be played around. In particular, these two cards care about fleeting or asleep. So if you suspect that your opponent will have them in play, or they're showing one in reserve, they will be able to hit your cards out of reserve, but not your cards that you play from hand. So if you want to try and play around these, if you think your opponent has it as an option available to them, play out of hand first until they get to that point where they can't use it in the manner anywhere any longer. One card that is surprisingly effective in Muna is Saw. This also applies to Ordis, as you'll see later, but it's one that is, I think, on the up in terms of how often it's seen in games, and it can represent a pretty big swing for not much mana. So until your opponent is completely out of mana, this is an option available to them. So, and sending plus giving a boost is effectively a 2-power swing on the expedition that they so choose, and if they want to follow it up with another thing, they can actually give it another boost for no extra mana. So think about that one. Works as a pretty good after you effect because the expedition ascending, even if you have no characters in play, still impacts the board. So if they lead on this, you'll expect they'll try and either win there or make some sort of play. Surprisingly flexible in its application. Trying to keep your removal in hand until they have to Saw is the way I tend to play around this card. If they think they're equaling you and, subsequently blocking your advancement and adding boost to theirs so they get to advance when you're tied, the removal can work as a bit of a blowout. Largely a mana negative play for you. You're going to have to spend 2 or 3 mana to get the character off the board. So playing slow and keeping your options available there might be a big deal. Stuff like teamwork training can hit that. And even if you expect that they will play it out, proactively hitting the creature that's on that side of the field you think they will Saw is the way to manage this card. Generally, I don't play around that card until I've seen it out of my opponent, but once they've revealed one, odds are they're going to have a second one available to them in the deck, not necessarily in their hand, but something to think about if you've seen the first one. The Spindle. So this is Muna and Lyra's potential option for invalidating your targeted removal. If they resupply one and you see it, sometimes you will have to hit a character early. If you have your permanent removal in hand, if you can get that onto the field and remove this incidentally, it can be valuable to you, but you, in the same way that you play around Parliament of Ashes, you have to consider when it's a better option to remove it or play into it. So occasionally you'll have just a single removal spell that can hit a permanent or a character of some description in hand, and sometimes it is worth just playing out and paying the extra 2 to hit it, the same way it's sometimes better to play and hit the tough 1 on Parliament of Ashes. But this one at rare also adds extra boosts to the board if they're playing anchored. So if you're seeing a lot of anchored characters, your Spindle Harvesters, Dracanas, Muna Druids going into reserve, you can likely expect one of these at some point. I usually don't think about it unless I'm playing specifically Argent and Spike, like against Argent and Spike, because this card will generally be able to give something of theirs a boost if they're keeping stuff around. Pretty big deal. But we'll look at the other two cards, and there is an honourable mention that I am missing, but there's a reason for that. So Hydrocana, generally a card on a bit of a downswing, I think, from when it was available in Beyond the Gates. It was a very big game ender for green in the early days of this game. Cards have largely caught up to it. It will stick around, and if you don't have the removal in play and your opponent gets 2 out on the field, you're most likely losing that game. But it is possible to play around it if you are ahead. So obviously spending 7 mana to get 4 power on the board is not a great deal. If it sticks around and it gets to the 8, obviously they're in a very good position, but there are options. So you can likely, with the additional mana that you have to utilize on the turn it comes down, can potentially get a 2 for nothing. Not that hard if your deck is set up for it. If you're obviously low on cards, that kind of thing, it's going to be a bit more of a difficult one to play around. But you do also have other options as well. So it has that tough effect and the eternal effect as well, which do give you windows of opportunity. So with tough, anything that doesn't target, like your blizzards, I think it is, will hit this card without having to pay the additional cost. And another one that I do sing the praises of is hypothermia. So each player targets a character that they own on the field, have to sleep something, gets around that toughness, and can sleep it for a turn and give you a slightly extra window for not that much mana. So think about those cards when you're building the deck. Generally, the stuff that hits it will be incidental to what it is that you actually want to hit. So stuff like the hunger or the bigger creatures, stuff that takes boosts with your license withdrawals. Most decks should have a plan for getting rid of these big creatures in a mana positive way. And then the last card we'll talk about is just Woolly Field. Particularly in Cowrie and Puff, this can be a big deal. Ties in really well with the card Pacify, where playing that card will negate the boost that they're giving you from the extra token. And as such, it does help in a lot of situations. Teamwork training obviously becomes easier to hit larger creatures, so you will want to keep that around. We'll have a look at Pacify as well. We'll add one of those to the board here. But as a 2/2, gains a boost per character your opponent controls. Not very hard for your opponent to boost this a very long way on a turn if they're giving you extra creatures with both Cowrie and then the Woolly Fields. Notably, Woolly Field plus Pacify will add 2 power to this card, while adding 1 power to your board, unless it comes down and then it becomes 3 and 2. So always positive. So if you see one of those Woolly Fields early, odds are Pacify is coming down. Now, the last card I wanted to talk about was, I've forgotten the name of it, so we're going to play a bit of catch up here. Rare characters. Skybound Odyssey. That's the card. That's the set there. Where'd he go? Cheeky little guy. No, I'm in the wrong set. Fair Fox. Cuddly Corgi. There he is. My bad. I'll cut that out. So, Cuddly Corgi represents a lot of either infinite or near infinite loops with Muna uniques. So, didn't make the cut because I didn't want to talk about uniques in this video necessarily, but this is one to think about. So if you ever see someone using the uniques where so when something gains anchored, give it a boost, or the other way around, whenever something gains a boost you can give something anchored. Cuddly Corgi will be able to anchor every single character they have that they can target. Arguably, I'd say it's a situational call for whether it's better to hit the Corgi or hit the unique with your removal. In those situations, it can vary wildly, largely dependent on whether either of them has fleeting or if they have enough mana to play out both cards again. But one to think about targeting your with your removal if you see it, because there may be something coming around the corner that just keeps all their characters on the field for in perpetuity, basically. Onto Ordis. This is one I obviously have a lot of experience with, and it represents a lot of good stuff. So I would argue that card quality for Ordis in general is higher than other factions, but the synergies that you build your decks around are a little bit weaker. So just playing out good cards, having answers, being able to draw extra cards, all very archetypical for this faction. And we'll just go through a bunch of cards that we think about when we're playing it. So Ordis Attorney, definitely a staple, arguably a 3 of in every deck. It allows you a way to incur some advantage while either giving up very little or actually actively blocking your opponent as well on the turn, in ideal cases. So 2 mana for a 2/2/2, obviously stat neutral. Don't worry about that one too much. It does represent a way to impact the board and puts your opponent to a lot of choices. You know, in this perspective, the opponent being us. And just a way for your Ordis opponents to draw an additional card while still going 1-for-1 is, you know, fairly strong, I would say. One of the cards I would expect to stay in the lists for as long as it's available, either in standard or the future Eternal format. Definitely a good one to hit with removal, because it doesn't actually trigger until after dusk. So if it's off the field by that point, it will not draw your opponent a card, even though it likely doesn't impact the board. But just generally puts you in a difficult position, because going down a card, you know, in the form of the removal you're pointing at the attorney is just a -1 for 0 investment from your opponent, even though it's generally a 1-for-1. But it stops them from going +1. So situational card, one you would expect to see in most Ordis lists, sorry, whatever faction you're playing. And we'll move on. Ordis Trooper and Haven Warrior represent the stat positive creatures that Ordis can have access to. Very powerful. This is definitely a staple. Haven Warrior still sees a fair bit of play as 3 mana for a 4/4/4, and then a free boost, or again 3 mana for a 4/4/4 is still pretty damn good. A rate for what it can do to the board. So in general, if you and your opponent have the same amount of mana, say for example 6, you can generally count that at the end of the turn, all things being equal, you should have 6/6/6 worth of stats distributed amongst both expeditions. However, these sort of break that pie, or that agreement a little bit. So if you're both tied and have access to 1 mana, you play out a 1 mana character for 1/1/1. They can play out an Ordis Trooper and just win, go 1 for nothing, and gain an advantage that way. So the way to play around that is to not be too complacent with expeditions being ahead. Say you both have 3 stats on the board, and you've still got mana to play out to add to it, and your opponent has 3 mana available still with the warrior, even if yours is all in the hero expedition and then theirs is in the companion. They still have the potential to advance on both sides if you just pass. So if you've got the mana available, sometimes overloading that side, even if you are losing a little bit of card advantage by putting something you wouldn't want to keep around, having to go into reserve, it might be still worthwhile just to maintain that parity. Haven Warrior I don't really think about until they've played one out, which is maybe a bit of a blind spot for me. Ordis Trooper, always going to be a 3 of, and always going to be a threat, so can't be too scared of it. Sometimes you'll be in a situation where you have to make them have it, and you will go down a card that you didn't have to, but in order to play around it, just add a few extra stats onto the board sometimes if you think they're representing it. In the same vein, Ascended Trooper here represents all the cards that can ascend expeditions. Largely that is a Ordis type of effect. Already spoken about it in Muna, but it's a lot more prevalent in blue. And in a similar way to the characters being stat positive, these can represent game swinging stat additions to the board as well. So 2 mana for a 2/2/2 on rate, big fan of that, but if they're already ascended, it'll gain an extra boost, so 3/3/3 for 2, or it ascends, which is functionally the same thing, because it means in order to block them from advancing, you actually have to have 1 extra stat on the board too. I suppose this could have tied into the previous cards as well, where sometimes overloading stats is a big deal. But it does create a lot of interesting situations where you have to make the right choice. Think about what it is that you're sacrificing and what it is that you can stand to gain or stop your opponent from gaining in order to win. Aegis Templar, same thing. Just another 1 mana play that can impact the board, and one that I think about if my Ordis opponents are representing 4 mana as well. So bit of a sneaky one, because it is stat negative but still even on the blue, so it can represent a way for your opponent to advance. And the Scout 1 can work as a pseudo after you effect as well. Adds an extra body onto the board, and I think sometimes people tunnel vision on just the Scout. So if your opponent has 1 mana available, obviously Ordis Trooper, big deal, but the Scout here as well can also swing a board, but creates a lot of options for your opponent as well. If they just play it from hand, add the stats onto the board and sort of lock it up, they do still invest that extra token for next turn. And so one of the things I do tend to think about when playing against Aegis Templars is whether it's better to remove it here. So even if I can't win on the expedition that the Templar is in play, I might still point my removal at it if I'd have no other better targets, because that will put the token into play on this turn and not give them a boost on the following turn, which can swing a lot of things. And sometimes when it's in play, even if you're hitting, like, say, a 1/2/2 or a 2/2/2 on the board instead of the Templar, it might be a good idea, because you have to think about the fact that even though you're taking 2/2/3 off the board, they're getting one back, which can matter. For Bravos and Yzmir pilots specifically as well, if you see this card come out when you're lining up to play a hunger, you do have to keep in mind that this will put a character back on the board even though the Templar itself gets discarded. So you are liable to, if they have a way to remove the hunger off the field, you are still liable to lose an expedition even if they can't do anything else after removing your hunger. So really think through your options when this card comes out. Not a lot of ways to play around the Scout 1, but a lot of ways to play out with this on the field as well. So sometimes hitting it early with removal is a good idea. Doesn't reduce the count that they can hit with teamwork training if you do remove it, because it replaces itself, but the timing of when that recruit is on the field can be very impactful. So think about that one. The Sandman, big sleep, 3 stats for 3 can be a big deal if no one cares about green on the side of an expedition. Represents a massive swing in stats, and then it can be stat positive from reserve as well in the right situations. The overarching theme of the Ordis cards is that they create a lot of decision points for both pilots. Obviously this is a flexible ability, so sleeping a character but also giving something 2 boosts means that they do have the option of sleeping one of their cards and gaining the boost for the following turn. Similar to Templar in that regard, because it keeps a character around on the next turn. Sacrifice something now in order to get something on a following turn can be a big deal. If you think your opponent is playing around this, toughness can make it difficult to get on the field with your Spindles, your Parliaments, naturally tough characters, but also Cowrie's Intervention for Bravos and Muna. This is largely unplayable if you have tough 5, or even just if they have 2 permanents on the field that give toughness. Can be a difficult one to play around if you suspect that they have one in hand, or you've seen one and they might have another one. Think about doubling up characters into expeditions that have green. So if you have 2 characters on one side where you care about green, even if they sleep something on your side, you'll still be able to advance. That 0 is one of the weakness points of the card, and then the other one is just that if they sleep one of their own characters, consider removing it. Generally speaking, if you get rid of the sleep, this is a vanilla creature understated, even though it is on rate in a lot of situations. One that you have to think about. And then the remaining one is the removal package. So license, withdrawal, teamwork training are both conditional. Hypothermia, I love this bloody card. Not a lot of ways to play around it, so this is our honourable mention for the day, so we'll come back to that one. But the teamwork trainings and the license withdrawals are both very important ones that you have to think about. Generally speaking, you'll never see a list with less than 2 of each of them, potentially 3 of each. or a 3-2 split, usually 3 teamworks, 2 withdrawals, and then maybe something like a tiny jail as well to make up numbers, but these two sort of just represent all of the conditional removal that Ordis has to play. So discarding boosted characters, and then your permanents, not much that can be done around discarding the permanents. You still want to get value out of those, so playing them early or playing them in situations where they don't have the 3 mana available to just get rid of it can be a big deal. So if you can get them under 3 mana and still play your Brassbug Hive or your Ouroboros or your Spindle, you should be able to get at least 1 turn worth of value out of that, or you will, if they can't play this on that turn. But that boosted character as the conditional clause is something that you can play around as well. So if you have 2 characters that you want to play out for a turn, but one of them gives itself a boost and one doesn't, let's say for example I know it's banned now, but like a tiny Djinn from hand and a tiny Djinn from reserve, one of them will get a boost and be discarded, whereas the other one is an invalid target for the license withdrawal. And if they have to play out and get under that 3 mana, your characters will stay around on the field more often. And then the other one is teamwork training. Say you've got 6 mana and then you've got a 5-drop and a 1-drop available to you. They've already played something out, so they have enough characters on the field to hit that 1-drop. Playing that out might open them up to the teamwork training, whereas playing your larger character will not get hit by that. So there are ways to play around this. And subsequently, if you have removal in hand as well, as a bit of a second order play, sometimes hitting one of their characters proactively might stop them from being able to send one of yours to reserve. So if they have 2 mana available, 3 characters out, and you've got, I don't know, like 5 mana for some reason, let's just say they played out something big, if you can remove even just one of their tokens and then play a 3-drop or a 4-drop, they won't be able to hit that with teamwork training. Whereas if you play out a smaller character, they might have that as an option. Or if you play out your character before the removal, it gives them a window to get rid of it. And then hypothermia. Doesn't target, is a big deal, very flexible card when you look under the hood. So if you've got anything available on the board at the start of a day and your opponent's playing first, you don't get a choice with this. So if you've got an anchored character or something that was asleep, or you make a token at the start of the day, they can just pay 1 mana, hypothermia, hit it. Sometimes they will hit their own character as well, but 1 mana for sleep is a pretty big deal if you're playing out first. So if you're in one of those situations where you've got a character out but you're playing first, you might be better off playing out a second character so that you've got an option on what to sleep. And if you don't, but you suspect that they have this in hand, playing out a lower value character first as well is a big deal. So say you're in the super late game, you got 9 mana available, you've got Cowrie's Intervention and the Hunger in hand. So what you do is you play out the Cowrie's Intervention, they play out something, you play out your Hunger, discard everything, and then they hit you with the hypothermia. That's likely a 0-2 for you. Whereas if you'd played, say, a Jumping Frog or Isenboshi as another 1-drop before you'd played the Hunger instead, then you have the choice to sleep your other thing. Obviously it gets discarded in that specific situation, but I'm thinking about something else for like say a Shenlong or a Kaibara, for example. Kaibara is a big one because it has the tough, hypothermia gets around that. So if you're trying to play towards that as your win condition, additional creatures on the board insulates against hypothermia. So think about that one. And then finally, I've done a lot of talking. I apologise. I'm trying to go through it as quick as possible, but I enjoy a good waffle. We've got Yzmir following it up. So some of these are specific to certain characters, certain heroes, sorry. Some of them are just generally good, but we'll go through those. A lot of them are low cost, which means they're a little bit harder to play around, but they do have play in general. But we'll start with the Studious Brothers. Disciple and Acolyte. Ways to reduce the cost of their spells. So Disciple, you can only get it when it's in reserve. The rare version has a reserve ability to reduce the next spell you play. There is a different wording on that. So the next spell you play this turn costs 1. As a reserve ability, support ability means that they have to play the spell immediately after reducing this cost. If they play out a character after activating this, they don't get the cost reduction. Good tip there for Yzmir players in general, but the rare version as a ability from reserve reads the next spell you play this afternoon costs 1, which means that your Yzmir opponent has the option to play out a character and then play another spell and still get the cost reduction. That can be notable, slightly more of an edge case than some of these other effects, but definitely worth thinking about. So if they play this out of reserve, you have to think about the characters that they're going to come out later, whereas because obviously if they've passed the turn to you, they can't play another spell that turn. That's the reason for it, but your opponent can get a little bit cagey with when they play that next spell to get the cost reduction. So even if, say, you play out the Disciple for 1, you get the ability, and then they spend all of their mana on some form of creature like a Baba Yaga, if they still have 0, you still might have to think about one of these 1-drop spells out of your opponent, like a Beauty Sleep, a Magical Training, a Rime Frost. So think about that one. And then Studious Acolyte. So playing spells for less if their base cost is some number or higher. The rare version reduces spells by 2 if the base cost is 7 or more. And I wanted to just highlight the specific interactions both of these cards have. So Acolyte is mana neutral from reserve. Cost 1 reduces something by 1. If they have 2 things to follow up with, they're actually ahead on mana. So if they can turn 2 4-drops into 3, they're spending functionally 7 mana. They're spending 7 mana to get 9 mana worth of cards. The rare version costs 2 and 1 the same, reduces spells by 2 or more, so they're most likely not going to be playing 2 spells and getting the cost reduction there, but it is mana neutral from hand as well. This one is a good target for early removal because they don't get the effect if it disappears, and if they're getting it out. So say they play it from hand, you get rid of it, they play it from reserve again, they only get 1 turn of that cost reduction instead of the 2, and also they're behind on mana. So hitting this one early and proactively is a very good way to deal with that card. Not always the option, sometimes you have other things that you want to hit with removal or you just want to advance your own game plan instead, but think about that when they drop one of these. Mage Dancer, big deal. In most matchups, they would have to spend 3 spells to get the Dusk Trigger. In Aphanis specifically, it's 2. So playing the spell gives them 1, the Mage Dancer itself gives them another 1, and then playing the second spell will give it a boost and give them the option to boost something else as well. So you have to think about the boost spells too. So something like Helping Hand or Sap Infusion will just get them to the 3 boosts immediately. If they're playing into that, it's generally the first thing that they're going to be doing on the turn, so you do have windows for hitting removal. But similar to the Ordis Attorney, this is a Dusk Trigger, and as such, sometimes it can be better to hold on to your removal till the end of turn, see what it is they want to do, and then get rid of this so they don't get the extra card. Very, very cheap for the stats that it can represent. Anchored can be a big deal, but mostly if they're playing out this card, you're going to be thinking about Helping Hands and Sap Infusions. So Helping Hands specifically is 2 mana for 4 stats worth of body. Keeps it around for another turn. So if you see them play this out from reserve early, sometimes you may want to hit that immediately. Depends on what removal you have in play, situational choice, but yeah, think about that one. Moonlight Jellyfish, specifically in Lindaway decks, this is one that I hit with removal more often than you would think. Obviously, its specific interactions with sacrifice can gain your opponent a lot of value, and as such, it's one that I strongly consider pointing removal at the point that it comes down. So if they play out a jellyfish, expecting to say Baba Yaga or Moth Lantern or Gift of Self, boom, they got a lot of options, doesn't really matter. If you hit the jellyfish first, they might not have a valid target, or they might not have a optimal target. So if they've already made their More token, they're planning on sacrificing the jellyfish. They generally don't before they have the sacrifice that they're going to play, but if you either remove this or force them to play it out again from reserve, you can probably flub their turn in some significant way. So think about pointing removal at that early. Obviously they get the card back into reserve if it's sacrificed on the from hand, and then if they're playing it from reserve, they draw an additional card. So either one of them works. Very situational that you would want to hit it, but definitely think about pointing it at it in the future. Suha, big deal. Mana negative, both from reserve and from hand, but that clause of going to reserve from the expedition zone and sabotaging can really mess up your turns. So what this does is that it forces you to play out everything you would for that day before they get to choose what to sabotage. So they're always going to hit their preferred target. And as such, the way to play around it would maybe be to sort of sandbag your best cards, or the ones that you want to keep around until she has gone to reserve. And if she gets played on the bounce back, she's a 1 mana 1/0/0, which is not the best rate. Definitely play around that one. But if you do see her early, especially, think about Helping Hands out of your opponent. Most of the time, that'll happen from a Thanos, but it's an option that every Yzmir hero has, because that can become very oppressive very quickly. If they can find a way to play out Suha with Helping Hand a few times, they will be impacting your ability to keep stuff in hand, and it is a way to cheekily gain card advantage for them. If you suspect they have one, or they've already played a Helping Hand, for example, and it's in reserve and you're not playing against a Thanos, obviously, think about hitting this down before they have a chance to take the fleeting away. Definitely one to think about. The other thing is that if you hit it with removal, say bloody, not a license withdrawal because that discards, but if you teamwork training it away with mana available, they won't be able to sabotage what it is that you play after this because it's already gone to reserve. So sometimes hit it early, sometimes get rid of it. Again, very situational, but think about that one. Rhymefrost and the Nilam represent the exhaust archetype here. So finding ways to gum up your opponent's board, in this situation your board, but also has proactive options as well. The Nilam as a color shifted rare is in Axiom, so we're going to make a quick note of that one specifically, but Exhausting your cards means that if you do play out more from hand, because they've limited your options on what to play from reserve, you may find yourself in situations where you have to discard things in order to stay level on the board. So Rime Frost in particular does that. The Neelam also does it. Try to avoid giving your opponent places where they can hit everything out of reserve. So if you've just got the one card and then say one or two cards in hand that will go to reserve at the end of the turn, functionally it works as a sabotage and keeps the more or less dangerous cards around or off the board for a turn. Specifically for Yzmir, exhausting a card in reserve does trigger off of cooldown spells too. So if they play a spell with cooldown, Moth to a Flame for example, they will actually make the additional mana moth, which can be a big deal. And then in Axiom specifically, the cards where you may exhaust them before the turn the afternoon has started also triggers the mana moth. So they will get one of these every turn if they have something they can exhaust in reserve. So think about sabotaging those ones out to break up the loop there, because it's basically just 2 stats free until they choose to play that card. And then, yeah, cooldown, not as easy to play around, but in Axiom specifically, sabotaging those cards away can stop them from getting the moths. And then finally, Beauty Sleep. Big ticket card, 1 mana, gives something a sleep. We like that with Hypothermia. This one is targeted. The way to play around this is not the easiest. Sometimes you just don't have the options. So say you play out 3 characters in a 2-1 split or a 1-2, they will be able to sleep the 1 character and stop you from advancing on that board, trading 1 for 1, where potentially you might have gone 2 for nothing or 2 for 1. For 1 mana, that's a pretty good trade. I would take that every day of the week. One to think about if you're playing bigger characters as well. So anything that's on the larger end, like a Linnaean Hydra that doesn't have toughness, can get hit by the Beauty Sleep, and if you and your opponent are both, say, 1 expedition away or a double advance away from winning, this will potentially end the game for 1 mana. And as such, you want to be thinking about it and trying to play out your most impactful characters once they're out of mana, if you can finagle it in that situation. Not the easiest one to play around, which is why this one was our honourable mention. However, you still have some form of play. So sometimes playing out all your characters onto one side and just overloading and taking a 1 for 1 will decrease the value of the Beauty Sleep in your opponent's hand, and that is the way that I would look at that card. And that's it. Tried to go a little bit quicker this time. Did not work out. I like waffling about these cards, and these, so Yzmir and Ordis specifically, are the 2 factions I play the most, so the ones I have the most to talk about when I'm excited. But yeah, that's it. If I missed any, let me know. If this was a good exercise or you learnt anything, also drop it in the comments. And yeah, see you soon. Sorry I missed the video last week, but we'll be back at it on the weekend. See you soon. Love your work.